You know, getting heavy industry to go green is one of the toughest challenges we face today. But what if one country already has a detailed blueprint for how to do it? Okay, let's dive into Sweden's really groundbreaking strategy for green steel and what it can teach all of us about building something called a de-risking state.
So, to really get a sense of the stakes here, you have to start with this number. The steel industry, all by itself, is responsible for a whopping 7% of global emissions from the energy system. I mean, this is not a problem you can solve with little tweaks here and there. This requires a total, top-to-bottom revolution in technology.
So the question is, how on earth do you solve a problem that big? How do you convince an entire industry, one that's been built on fossil fuels for centuries, to make this huge, risky, multi-billion-dollar bet on technology that's, well, still pretty new? Sweden thinks it has the answer.
So, here's how we're going to break down their blueprint in this explainer. We'll start with the policy foundation they laid, then we'll look at the specific financial tools they're using. After that, we'll see how they're pulling in money from Europe. And finally, we'll ask the big question. Is this a model that others can actually copy? All right, so let's get into it. How did Sweden even begin to build the foundation for such a massive change? Well, their success really boils down to three key pillars that create the certainty you need for big investments: setting a clear direction, putting a serious price on carbon, and using strategic state ownership.
Okay, first up, direction. Sweden's climate policy framework isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's the law. It legally binds the country to hit net zero emissions by 2045. Now, if you're a company thinking about a massive investment that won't pay off for decades, this law is like a stable, long-term marching order. It takes a lot of the political guesswork out of the equation.
Second pillar, pricing. Sweden has pretty much proven that you can put a price on carbon without tanking your economy. In fact, it's been the opposite. Since 1991, they've managed to cut their emissions by almost 30%, while their economy, their GDP, grew by 84%. It's a really powerful comeback to anyone who says climate action kills growth.
And believe me, they are not messing around. Sweden's carbon tax is the highest in the world, sitting at about $137 per ton. This is not just for show. It creates this constant, intense pressure on the market that makes sticking with old-school fossil fuels a really, really bad business decision.
And this brings us to the third pillar, and it's a big one: strategic state ownership. You see, the difference in mindset here is just everything. Your typical company, it's all about maximizing value for shareholders, usually in the short term. But a company owned by the state can play the long game. It can put big social goals like decarbonization first, even if it means smaller profits right now.
And here's a perfect example of that in action. LKAB, the state-owned mining company, is a huge player in this green steel project. To help pay for its massive 400 billion kroner transformation, the government literally agreed to lower the company's profit target, its return on equity, from 12% down to 9%. So the state is actively using its power as an owner to help finance the transition. That's the key.
Okay, so once you've got that solid foundation in place, what comes next? Well, now we can look at the actual tools in Sweden's financial toolkit. These are the specific programs they designed to pump money into these projects and, maybe even more importantly, to absorb a lot of the initial risk.
And there are a couple of tools here that are just essential. The first is a program called Industrileaft, which basically means the industrial leap. It gives direct grants to big projects. For instance, it pumped 3.1 billion kroner into the pioneering HYBRIT project. The second is the Green Credit Guarantee. This is where the state promises to cover up to 80% of the risk if a bank gives a loan. This was a game changer for the startup H2 Green Steel, helping them get a massive 1.2 billion euro guarantee.
Now, here's the really smart part. Sweden isn't trying to do all this heavy lifting by itself. A huge piece of their blueprint is plugging their national programs into the much, much bigger financial engine of the European Union. That's how you get to the massive scale you need for something like this.
And this is where you can really see that layering effect come to life. That 1.2 billion euro guarantee from Sweden was the key that unlocked everything else. It gave other big lenders the confidence to jump in, including the European Investment Bank, which chipped in another 750 million euro loan. All of that together helped H2 Green Steel raise an incredible 3.5 billion euros in debt.
And it's not just about loans. We're also talking about direct cash infusions, grants. The EU Innovation Fund, which is actually funded by the EU's own carbon market, has put money into both of Sweden's big green steel ventures. HYBRIT got 143 million euros, and H2 Green Steel was part of a huge multi-billion euro funding round.
All right, so you take the foundation, you add the toolkit, you plug it into Europe's financial power. What do you actually get? Well, you get this really powerful system that actively encourages innovation and helps create brand new markets. This is what the de-risking state looks like when it's working, and wow, the results are stunning.
You know, there's a quote from the source material that just nails this concept perfectly. The state isn't just sitting on the sidelines making rules, it's an active partner. It's an entrepreneurial state. It jumps in to take on those huge, scary upfront risks that private investors just won't touch, and it bridges that critical gap between a cool idea in a lab and a real product you can sell.
So, the big question, does it work? Oh yeah, it works. Get this. H2 Green Steel locked in pre-orders worth over 100 billion Swedish kroner. That's roughly $10 billion US for green steel they hadn't even made yet. By taking the risk out of the project, the state basically gave the company a huge head start in a global market that's hungry for this stuff.
Okay, let's zoom out and pull this all together. If you were going to write down a playbook based on what Sweden did, what would the key repeatable steps be? What's the core blueprint that other countries could potentially follow?
Here it is, boiled down to 4 steps. First, you set a legally binding long-term goal and you use state-owned companies to help push everyone in that direction. Second, you use targeted grants to help the most promising technologies get to a commercial scale. Third, you use national loan guarantees to soak up risk and make private banks feel safe to invest. And fourth, you partner with bigger, international funds to get the kind of money you really need. You see, it's a complete interlocking system where every part supports the others.
And that leaves us with the big question, right? Sweden has put together this really powerful blueprint that mixes market forces with smart government action. But is this model, which really leans on state ownership, high taxes, and being part of the EU, is it something any country can just pick up and use? Or is it a special success story that only works because of Sweden's unique circumstances? That's really the billion-dollar question for every country trying to build a green industrial future.